So I want to go to something a little bit more controversial. Tell us what white shifting is.
Yeah, so white shifting is this concept, and it's kind of one of a couple ways that you can refer to it. It's arguably a little bit more controversial, but this is a term I'm borrowing from a book called White Shift by a race and ethnicity scholar named Phil Kaufman, who is himself multiracial, but kind of presents and sort of thinks of himself as culturally white, if that makes sense, as a rough thing. But it's this kind of idea that you would have what's called almost multiracial whiteness, and this is actually a term that people would use, so that you have people with multiracial backgrounds. They could be Eurasian, they could be Hispanic. I argue this is kind of the really biggest group here that it might affect too, because Hispanics are people who already have a lot of European ancestry. They have a kind of history that is kind of a mestizo history, depending on who they are, but culturally some affinity for Europe. And a third of these folks are already marrying in to kind of white Anglo families. So you have a group that, unless you want to take a racist one drop kind of blood view of what whiteness is, or unless you are giving them an incentive, a legal incentive to identify as something other than white, arguably could be part of what, and this is kind of the more polite way of talking about it among scholars, an ethnogenesis. So what I'm basically arguing is we need to create a new American identity. That identity is ultimately going to be multiracial in the sort of strict sense that we would talk about race, but hopefully
Yeah.
more around a common American culture, a history. So you're going to have people of a variety of different hues, a variety of different historical ethnic backgrounds, but they're identifying really closely with George Washington. They're identifying really closely with America's history. And because they have often even ancestry that goes back to all of that. And that's that kind of unified story, rather than the kind of tossed salad metaphor that's often used today to describe things. That's what we're focusing on, that type of unity.
Do you think so? This sounds to me like assimilation. You're basically you're saying people should assimilate, right? Like they need to assimilate to a certain like an American, what we view as the American culture
Yeah,
or the American lifestyle.
that's correct. I mean, the assimilation would be the sort of umbrella term that we would use for it. But I think it's a particular type of assimilation when you have this multicultural group that you're sort of assimilating with. So it's not just like I am coming from a total foreign background and I'm saying, like, go embrace American culture. Of course, I think everybody should do that. What I'm suggesting is, right now we've sort of set up a system where if you have anything, I mean, the most extreme example is these Native Americans, where you can be 1/64th Cherokee and you're an enrolled member in the tribe, and there's all sorts of incentives for you to identify as Cherokee. And you look at this person and like, this is a white guy, what are you doing?
Right.
And I'm saying, in fact, we should switch around the incentives, so that, not that I'm trying to erase other parts of people's identities, right? But that it's good if we all kind of unify around an identity. And that's how I think we can get away from some of the very toxic racial politics that have taken over the country.
But a lot of the racial politics a lot of the, this comes from like the Black communities where it really started, right? And then it kind of has now spread to a bunch of other groups. But I would say predominantly within the Black community. Many in the Black community, though, they're not immigrants. I mean, they're not that anti-white racism that is coming up, saying that we need to right the wrongs, we need
Right.
reparations, we need to, these are from people that are American. I mean, they're not like my family that immigrated over from Vietnam
Sure.
and then assimilated.
Right.
These are people they've been here since the dawn of time. I mean,
Right.
many of them, their families have been here since before even America was America.
Sure. Of course. In many cases.
So how do you select then what is the culture that we should be then?
Yeah.
Why not the Black community and their culture, that there's a unique culture that is for many that has been formed. And so why not that culture versus why the European
Yeah.
culture, or
Well, I think
why not the Hispanic culture, especially as they become the predominant population over time, why not their culture?
Well, I think inevitably you're going to have this. I mean, this is a sort of broader discussion of what assimilation looks like. And that's never to me. And the reason I don't like to use the word assimilation as much is that it's not a one-way street to me. Inevitably, all groups, I remember even going back, this is now going back a little bit in ancient history, but Lee Iacocca was a very famous auto executive when I was a kid. He was kind of like a Bill Gates, Elon Musk type public celebrity among CEOs. And I remember reading his autobiography, and he talks about growing up as a young Italian guy in the early 20th century, and he would have pizza parties, and all of his sort of non-ethnic American friends would make fun of him because, like, what is this strange pizza thing? What's a pizza party? I've never heard of something so crazy. Well, now, like, what could be more American today than pizza? So I think it's inevitable that
Right.
you're going to have, this is why I don't love the word assimilation, because you're going to have inevitably interchange, and that's fine. And in fact, I think that's a good thing. And I'm not suggesting that people completely give up their other identities. I'm suggesting that right now, when we have a choice of identities, we're pushing people away from something that would unify them in favor of something that kind of makes it sort of more fragmented. And, where I really saw actually a very interesting example, and I think in contrast often to other places I've been, I was just down in San Antonio, which is a city that is super majority Hispanic at this point and only
Yeah.
23% white Anglo. The Hispanics, of course, many of them have been there since well before Texas was a state even. And it's a very
Yeah.
American place, even though it's a very multi-ethnic place. And so I think that type of model is not that there are not problems in San Antonio. And again, I wrote about this recently, but I think that's something that we could aspire to a little bit more.
You say that you think that America should be built around America's European heritage. Why not the Mexican heritage?
Well, I do
I mean,
think,
half a huge chunk of this country, like where I live now, was Mexico. We do have a huge number of Hispanics moving in. We're not in Europe. We're not even close to
yeah,
Europe. We're an ocean away. So why do we need to focus on European heritage over, which I don't even understand what European heritage is. Do you mean, because there's so many cultures in Europe?
yeah.
So do you mean British heritage?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to be really more strict about it, you would say that. I mean, it is the public culture of America grew out of a time, um, at the time of independence, as best we could tell, of the free citizen population of the U.S. It was 85% British. So America's public
Mhm.
culture really comes out of this particular thing, and it's not equally from everywhere, even though obviously we have to welcome everybody into this country. We have to make an American identity, but the reality is we're not equal. I mean, I used to live in India, right? I had a lot of Indian friends, but we're not equally in our origins an Indian culture and a European culture, at least a British culture. But even more broadly, and why I'm kind of using European as a catch-all, is obviously in the interim we had a lot of other groups that through the 18th century, through the 19th century, kind of built up America, who settled America, and overwhelmingly, although certainly not exclusively, but overwhelmingly, these were European groups. And I do think that that's the base culture of America. That's the base traditions. It's the home of a lot of the really good traditions around free speech and free association and capitalism that I think have been very beneficial for the U.S. And I don't think we should, apologize for that.
No, I mean, I certainly think that there are some benefit. I mean, Europe's a great place. There's a lot of great countries and cultures in Europe. Um, I guess, and I understand that the 13, the original colonies were certainly built by European settlers, mostly British
Yeah,
settlers. But then when you move west, I mean, much of the areas that we're in now, like where you are in Texas and where I am in California, I mean, these are Mexico. This was Mexico. This was all
sure.
Mexico. So I guess um, I don't know. I mean, I don't. What would the U.S. if we made ourselves like a giant Great Britain?
Right.
What do we want to? Do we want that? Is that what we're looking for?
No, and I don't think that's realistic. I mean, any sort of thing where you're trying to turn back the hands of time or kind of get to some mythological Arcadia in the past is doomed to fail. I guess here's the way to think about it to me in terms of a Texas and a California. There were obviously, and we should absolutely tell these stories, and I think we frankly do these days. Texas, California, other parts of the Southwest, in addition to obviously the native presence here, which goes back well before any Europeans showed up, but you have this really important Hispanic and Spanish role in the early settlement of these areas, and you see this. And if you go, I was just down at the Alamo, you certainly see it there. At the same time, in the 1960 census, which was the last one before the Hart-Celler immigration bill that kind of dramatically changed our immigration system, we were 3.5% Hispanic as a country. 80% of those were native born, many of whom had been here for generations. And they were very assimilated
Yeah.
into what was, even in Texas and California, with a few exceptions really down south near the borders, these were predominantly European cultures. And it was only subsequent to Hart-Celler that you then began to get them to be more multicultural, because more people begin to cross the border from Mexico and from Latin America, and then you begin to get immigration from everywhere else as well.
Don't you think, though, that, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is the fundamental, if we're going to try to get everybody, you don't like to use the word assimilation. I think white shifting is a worse word. I don't know.
Yeah.
Why use white shifting and not assimilation? Assimilation sounds a lot. I mean, white shifting is like, I want everybody to be white.
Well,
Everybody
maybe
should
not.
be white.
It may be ethnogenesis. That's like the scholarly term for
Okay.
what you would call it. So maybe that's a better term.
Okay. So, first of all, you'd have to define what that is, right? You'd
Yeah.
have to define, like, what is the culture, what is the behavior, what are the values that you think that people should be adopting,
Yeah.
right, when they come here.
Yeah.
Secondly, though, don't you think that, I mean, in my view, the American values are the freedom, capitalism,
Sure.
entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
freedom of speech, right? Freedom, right?
Right.
And like a just justice system. We're
Sure.
supposed to have these things. And that's why people come to this country, is they want those opportunities and they want to be free from tyranny. Mostly they want the economic opportunities. That is what drives the vast majority of immigration to this country.
Right.
And most people have come from a variety of different backgrounds in this country. Like, I just don't know if we're really having a problem on the immigration front as much as people think we are. I know that the border crisis is very scary. Look, I haven't looked a ton into it as far as what the impact is. Certainly, I don't want bad people through the border.
Sure.
They need to be vetted.
Sure.
I totally agree with that. But as far as the impact on society, like, once you get past if we could vet for the bad people, if we could vet for the terrorists and make sure that these murderers, rapists, terrorists don't get through on the border, once you vet for that, what is the actual impact of all of these people coming into the country? Is it a positive or is it a negative? Nobody seems to be able to actually determine using actual data, saying, yes, they're actually taking jobs away, or they're actually lowering wages, they're actually causing a problem, or are they filling a need that we, as a dwindling population, because we have a low birth rate, that they're actually supplying for that lack of birth rate. As societies become more developed, they tend to have less children. So, I don't know about that impact, but beside all of that, I mean, people come to this country for those American values, and I think they do naturally assimilate. I don't even think we need to force it. We don't even need to have a conversation about it, really. I mean, it just seems to, with people like, hey, you have to assimilate. It seems like they do naturally. That's why they're here. Unless they were here like an actual invasion, right? Where they're genuinely coming in, trying to take over, and they have that sort of, agenda.
Right.
Anybody that shows up on these shores, like my family from Vietnam, which is a completely different culture, different religion, different everything, right?
Yeah.
They didn't even need to, there was like no attempt to assimilate them.
Right.
They just did. Right? Because they were coming here for those very things that are very American in value, in just naturally American. Do you see what I'm saying?
So, I mean, you've raised a number of kind of really interesting points here. I'll try to address some of them, because the immigration chapter is kind of important. I think.
Well, and it's top of everybody's mind right now. I mean, immigration is, interestingly, the number one issue on Americans' mind, more than the economy, which is like never happens.
No, absolutely. So I think there's a few different things. One is, I don't do any immigrant bashing. I think I agree with you about what most immigrants come here for. They're not coming to.
Yeah, like, look at all the wave of the Italians, the wave of the, and like I get they're in Europe,
Sure.
but they're totally
No,
different than the
they
Brits,
were, and
right?
you
So
can.
you've got like
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
yeah. No, but I'm just saying we've had so many different waves of immigrants come into this country that have that they're I mean like the Hispanics that you've talked about, the Mexicans that were here before it
Right.
was America, the Italians that came in, the Asians that have come in and now are building the country and are very American.
Right. So I think there's a few things going on here, right? So first of all, again, as I said, I don't immigrant bash. I don't think we should. I'm very
Yeah,
critical of the people who set U.S. immigration policy, and I bash them all the time because I don't think it's worked
sure.
very
Well,
well.
that's fair. I mean, those people, what do? They don't do
Yeah,
anything.
I mean, I don't think it's worked in America's interest, but I don't, I don't like the sort of murderers and rapists dialogue. I don't like, because I think it is absolutely
Uh-huh.
true that most people here, they want to come here, they want to be American, they want to do well, they want to get the economic value of being in America, and they want to be patriotic. I mean, I do believe that. Having said that, that is different than like whether it's working well for society. And maybe one of the things that I talk about, and maybe you don't agree with this, maybe you do, I think kind of contrary to the sort of almost public religion of America, that diversity in and of itself in large amounts tends to be a problem. In other words, we're much better when we're unified as a country. And by that, I don't mean you can obviously go
Right.
to the opposite extreme and then you're just a fascist, right? And everybody's the same. I don't think that's right either. I think you can have a certain amount of diversity and that's good. But I think the history of multi ethnic polities, and in particular multi ethnic democracies, especially when you're pushing people into different racial categories and trying to say, well, you get things if you're in this category and you don't if you're in this category, that's a very sobering history. It's often one that has not worked very well. And so I am reluctant to do that here. In other words, I do not agree with Dan Quayle, who said in the wake of the LA riots in the early 90s, that was where the phrase diversity is our strength came from. And I just, I don't agree with that at a baseline. Even if I think the diverse people
Hmm.
who are coming here they could even be better, like on average in terms of
Yeah.
their human capital. But diversity in and of itself, when it gets too much, becomes a problem.